I would like everybody to give them a warm welcome. Ken Johnson Mondrego and Armando Cervantes.
I'm very excited to be here with you, along with Ken, to share with you hopefully a little bit of an overview of what we're talking about when we say let's engage Hispanic Latino community. Hopefully through our conversation, the goal is to try to kind of get into the roots of the Hispanic Latino community, and really through the process of the Encuentro, which is a beautiful process that I'll let Ken explain a little bit later. I thought we would probably start with some words of our Holy Father, because I think our Holy Father has really opened up this conversation of vocations, which you care so much about, and God bless you for that, and this invitation on how to engage young people. Hispanic Latinos are one of the youngest communities in the entire United States who we can invite and engage, and Pope Francis, through his words, is inviting those young people to be saints. So holiness is inviting them to a vocation. Just recently, his latest apostolic exhortation, has anybody ever heard of Christus Vivit? Has anybody read Christus Vivit? I got some good nods at the beginning, did not get anything at the end. All right, very good, very good. Gives us some homework assignments to kind of work on. So this is good because it puts me in an opportunity to share with you a little bit about Christus Vivit. So Christus Vivit means Christ lives. And it's Pope Francis's latest apostolic exhortation on working with young people. Fascinatingly enough, he actually wrote the document first in Spanish. Then it was translated to English. And so I share this because it's very interesting how even the very same sentence still has a different nuance when written in Spanish versus written in English. So I highlighted in this specific quote, he's talking about this idea that lay vocation is something that we don't just do internally, but we got to do externally as well. And he focuses on, above all, charity within the family and to social and political charity. And a lot of times in English, you're like, what is he saying? I get the words, but it doesn't sound right in English. Does that make sense? But it sounds perfectly fine in Spanish. Because when we talk about family charity, family for the Hispanic Latino is this kind of ecosystem of who we are, is what we do. I remember I was talking to a Hispanic once, and they were saying, well, I care about family just as much as you do. Why is it different? And I said, I'll give you an example. You know someone who's very, very Hispanic or Latino, because they'll come to you and they'll say, how is your family? They're not going to ask you, how are you? Because in effect, how your family is doing is how you are doing. That's the familial, the charity aspect of the family. Does that make sense? So when you and I say, how are you? I don't usually care about your family or your background. I'm just asking about you. But in the Hispanic community, they won't ask about you, because what's important is your family, where you come from. That charity extends beyond you. So I'm asking a simple question, and yet not just one connected to you. Does that make sense? So it's a fascinating way, just as a way to open us on how family is seen differently, on how this charity Pope Francis is starting to invite us to reflect on. So I figured I could focus on two big chapters that Pope Francis talked about in Christus Vivit. One chapter was to all of us as adults, and he said all of us should be youth ministers. Now, I may have the title of Youth and Young Adult Ministry in the Diocese of Orange, but the challenge and the invitation is for all of us to be youth ministers. He says our young people need to be accompanied, need to be walked with. You want to talk to them about vocations? Then you need to accompany them so that you can talk to them. If you're not accompanying them, how are you going to even talk about it? He says, you want the secret? All of us are youth ministers. And when you accompany, you on this journey together are able to share with them, are able to ask them, are able to invite them. But don't start inviting them if you're not willing to walk with them. Accompanying is the first secret for all of us in youth ministry. The second step, allow them to encounter Christ. Not the way you and I encountered him. Allow God to encounter them in their journey. And it's interesting because how do we do this when it has to do with the Hispanics in your community? As I start sharing and tell you all the things that I'm thinking about, I do have to take a step back and say, well, let me tell you a little bit about myself before I just blabber on, because it's important that you know who I am. Born and raised in California, Orange County. I don't know really any other place. I mean, I've traveled and I've seen the world, but Orange County is my home. Spanish was my very first language because my parents immigrated from Mexico, but they landed in Orange County from two different places in Mexico. If you've ever been to Mexico, my dad's from Michoacan and my mom's from Aguascalientes. Two, maybe a little lesser known states, but they both met in Orange, and there in Orange is where I was born and my two other siblings. My first language was Spanish because my parents only spoke Spanish, right? So I studied, learned in the United States. But because my dad was so strict with Spanish, my Spanish is perfect. I can speak it, I can write it, I can read it, and I'm able to do the same presentation here in English or Spanish because of how strict my dad was. And when I was young, maybe I didn't like it so much and I was upset with my dad. But now I appreciate it because I am bilingual and bicultural. But why do I share that with you? Because I am speaking of all Hispanic Latinos today with you. But I have to tell you that I have biases. I'm not from Florida, where there's maybe more Dominicans or Puerto Ricans. I'm not from a border town that has a different type of Latino in your community. I'm giving you the generalizations, but I come with my own biases because of where I've grown up and where I've learned. Does that make sense? And so it's important that you know, as presenters, that we come with those biases. So as I share with you, I'm sharing with you my experience as a youth minister, as now a diocesan director, but it's through the lens of my bilingual, bicultural reality. What does Pope Francis continue to share with us? Here he focuses now on vocation. There's a whole chapter, so if you're not going to read the whole Christ Lives, Christus Vivit, my invitation to you is to read chapter 9, because it's all about vocations. And chapter 9, all about vocation, says we need a place of welcome for our young people. They do not see the church as a place of welcome. And we need to create spaces, not just youth ministries. Churches could be a place of welcome. Communities, Serra groups, organizations. How are we making spaces that people feel welcomed? They don't enter our spaces simply because this is not where they feel welcomed. And some people say, well, does that mean it has to be in Spanish? It might. Some people, if you would have asked me to be involved in the Serra Club when I was in high school, I wouldn't have read anything that wasn't in Spanish because I went to Mass only in Spanish. My very first experience of Mass in English was when I went to UC Irvine at their Catholic Newman Center. That was my first experience of English Mass. Not because, there was an English Mass at my church, but we always went to Mass in Spanish with the family. And actually, the very few times I did go to English, because we got there and it was a English Mass, my mom was right here next to me, and every response to every prayer was always in Spanish. So I always just spoke in Spanish. I understood what was being said, but I didn't know any of that stuff, right? So how are we making a place of welcome? In the language that invites the person. English, Spanish, Vietnamese, whatever language it takes to engage the person and invite them. How do we call our young people to friendship? If vocation is going to happen, Pope Francis is inviting us to God's call to friendship. If vocation is going to happen, it's going to happen because we're inviting them to discern and discover God in their lives. The invitation that we're giving is only the initial step. God's going to do the rest of it. But how are we inviting them to that relationship? Because remember, social media right now, I have friends everywhere. I don't need another friendship. I don't need a friend that I can't really see. I have a lot of friends everywhere. How do we invite them to probably the most important relationship of their lives? And we go back to how do we accompany them through this process? And lastly, being there for others. Pope Francis reminds us that the young people of today are looking to go out into the world and do something for others. How are we living our life outside of the church as well, so that they're seeing witnesses of faith outside of the church walls? Because sometimes we're so insular. We only care about the people that come to our churches when really there's a bigger world out there. I even have the challenge in my diocese when I talk to youth ministries and youth ministers and I say, hey, youth minister, how is your youth group? Oh, my youth group is great. Well, I noticed you have a Spanish youth group too. How's the youth group in Spanish? Oh, I don't know. I'm not in charge of them. And well, does your title say youth minister of English speaking young people? Or is it youth minister? Well, it's youth minister. Well, then it doesn't matter what language they speak. You should be ministering to all of them, right? And a lot of times we end up faulting or falling in this, well, I don't have to be there for them because someone else is taking care of them. Our young people need us to accompany, to welcome them, to connect them to God, and above all, to help them be there for others so that we can help them in their personal vocation as they find what they're looking for. And sometimes that may look different from you and I. That may be in a different language, but it is a way to reach their hearts. Amen? So, as we close up with the last one, our call to love, or our invitation to love. This is probably the hardest of them all. Well, the hardest or the easiest, however you want to see it. Pope Francis is all about love, rejoicing. Every document that he's talking about is always pushing us more to help others. He is asking us, if we want to truly accompany Hispanics, and all young people for that matter, how are we calling them to love? How are we calling them to realize their Christian vocation, whatever it may be, right? Hispanics at this point sometimes aren't in the realms of where we reach them. We send bulletin announcements. Maybe they read them, maybe they don't. We put announcements in the pulpit. Maybe they listen to that, maybe they don't. Maybe it's only in English, so you would never reach those who speak Spanish. Maybe you do it through the traditional means. Some people, because as a diocesan director, they say, Armando, you send it to the pastors and the bulletin editors and it'll get to the parish. Sometimes that doesn't get to the parishes. So imagine a Hispanic youth group who's not connected to the youth minister. Would they ever hear that call? No, they never get it. So all of our efforts to promote, to share, to invite, never get to that Hispanic family or Hispanic young person simply because the systems aren't in place. We think we have them in place. They seem like we have them in place. The diocese sent it to the bulletin puts it in, puts it in the pulpit, and everyone gets the information. I wish it was that simple. We are still falling short in really just telling the story, inviting people, encountering, loving. My intention with starting with Pope Francis was that this isn't just for the Hispanic. All young people need this. As a director of youth ministry, we need more young people to hear these things. Everyone needs to hear it, because even amongst young people, they start sharing with each other. But if no young person's hearing this is not what they talk about, which ends up hurting all of us. And so I wanted to start with the macro and then start focusing in on how this serves the Hispanic youth. Father Luke, and you guys, I think he's around. Father Luke is around. He was sharing with us from the USCCB some wonderful quotes of young priests and religious, right? And they were sharing us just the different things that they wanted to be. That we somehow feel like vocation is just a one-way track, and yet our young people who are dreaming of what they want to do, they're telling us all these things that they want it to be, and yet God could be still tugging at their hearts. Hispanics will tell you all the time, oh yeah, my parents talked about priesthood, or yeah, we're very Catholic because we're Hispanic, but I don't know what that means. How do we engage the conversation with them at that point? How are we engaging Hispanics in their family setting? If we ask them, how's your family doing? How are we making sure that that family is taking vocation awareness seriously, right? If materials don't exist, if efforts aren't put in place, then we're not engaging the Hispanic young person who's dreaming of being an archaeologist. Because maybe he's dreaming of that, but at some point, we'll see priesthood as one of his steps. Here's some other quotes from sisters. When young people hear this aspect of religious or priest, they're so surprised, right? What, they're normal people? That's not what they do, right? Priests, go to their room and pray all the time. Maybe they levitate because they're so holy, right? I had a young person who said, you work for the diocese? And I said, yeah, I work with the bishop. And he said, wow. And I said, it's just an office. And he goes, but yeah, you must walk in and holy water just sprays everywhere. And I'm like, I said, no, that is a good idea though. Maybe we should do more holy water spraying. But it's so interesting how young people will see religious, priests, people who work for the diocese, right? Somehow there's this sense in a removed aspect that I can't be like that. And yet it is our job to make that gap smaller. Imagine for a Hispanic how much more that gap exists when I may not understand the language, when I may not know the system in place, where I may not understand the way things work. I remember the first time I walked into UC Irvine. I walked into UC Irvine, the Newman Center. We all sat in a circle, and they asked us to pray the Our Father. And I mumbled in Spanish really quietly. And someone said to me, "You don't even know the Our Father?" And in my mind, I wanted to say, "Yes, I do, but just in Spanish." But somehow it wasn't, somehow I was different. I wasn't the same. I couldn't participate the same as everybody was, just because I couldn't pray the Our Father in the same language. And yet, whenever I teach, when I've been a catechist, and I've been a catechist for years, the first thing we teach kids, what does Catholic mean? It means universal. They're agreeing with me. It means universal. Catholic means universal. How are we living our universal faith? Why does it matter what language we speak it in, if what matters is God? Why does it matter what language? If you want to say the sign of the cross in Spanish or in Chinese, it doesn't matter, because you're saying the same thing I'm saying. The very first World Youth Day I went to was John Paul II's, now St. John Paul II's, in Rome. And the most beautiful of all the experiences, the most beautiful one was the closing mass, when we were all holding hands together and we started praying the Our Father. And I can't tell you what the person to the right was saying, and I can't tell you what the person to the left was saying. But I can tell you this: we started and ended at the very same time. And people all around were just praying. That's the beauty of our faith. And we get so stuck sometimes on the language and what should I do and how should I do it, that we miss the opportunity to go and serve people just where they're at. And our Hispanic Latinos need people to be advocates to find them right where they're at. Because I didn't have a choice whether I went to English or Spanish Mass. But it took a priest coming to me in Spanish Mass and saying, "Hey, you should come to World Youth Day. You're really involved." We never got an invite in the Spanish Mass to go to World Youth Day. It was because someone invited me that I got a chance to do that. If we are not the advocates, if we're not the bridge builders, if we're not the ones making that invitation, a lot of times no one is. And our Hispanic Latinos who have a larger gap, a larger way to get there, they're missing that opportunity. Make sense? So our invitation today through our conversation is that maybe we can lessen that gap. We can find ways to assist our Hispanic Latino, especially young people, hear this invitation of vocation. Amen?